Hello, everybody. So we were introduced when we tried to do the live stream, but for technical reasons, we have to make this a video instead. We thank you for your attendance during the live stream, and I will now cover some of the stuff that I covered before we got distracted. And yeah, I hope it is useful. And again, if you have any questions at the end of this video, please leave them on the comments. I will do my best to answer them. And again, you can also contact me on LinkedIn. I will be more than happy to answer your questions there as well. But I don't want to take much more time, so let's go back to it. So I gave a little bit of a background to why this presentation, but basically the goals of this presentation is that you have an understanding at a basic level of how the Swedish unemployment system works, what are its parts, what kind of money sources are out there, the requirements for some of these money sources, and then how to actually go about it. How do you sign up for some of these programs and when should you do it? So this is an idea of how the system is structured. So your total compensation is determined by mainly the A-Kassa system and the income insurance. There is a thing called the Alpha Kassa, which is the only component that actually comes from the government, but there are some restrictions. So you can sort of get the idea that your main compensation during your entire unemployment period will come from the A-Kassa and the inkomstförsäkring, or income insurance, as it's called in English. So let's cover the A-Kassa. Right. So what does A-Kassa mean? It means arbetslöshetskassa, or unemployment fund, so to speak, or in English, it's better to call it unemployment insurance. And the thing about it is that it is voluntary to sign up for. So I think that's one of the main issues with this system is that nobody, especially as a foreigner, nobody tells you to sign up for this, because a lot of Swedish employers kind of assume that it's voluntary. So why should I tell my employees about this? And another thing about the A-Kassa is that it is usually tied to a workers' union, or a fack, as it's called in Swedish. And the way they calculate your compensation for the duration of your unemployment period is based on dagpenning, which means day money. So depending on your income from before you were unemployed, it could be anywhere from around 500 Swedish crowns up until 1,200, which is the actual legal limit of the A-Kassa as per 2022. If you've seen something else, please let me know. I will be happy to update this, but that's the legal limit that you can get from an A-Kassa as of the law today. The thing about the A-Kassa is that it is also based on your industry. So, for example, there is the academics A-Kassa, then there's the teachers A-Kassa, there is also the metal and steel workers A-Kassa. So for every sector of the economy, there is probably an A-Kassa. In Sweden, off the top of my head, there are about 27 of them. If I remember correctly, you'll get a resource after this video, but 20-ish, you can imagine. And there are conditions that you have to meet. For example, for the academics A-Kassa, which is the one that I have, the main requirement is that you have at least a bachelor's degree, which is equivalent to a certain amount of credits in university, or you are on your way to finishing a bachelor's degree. There are also general requirements that apply to every single one of these A-Kassas, and it's generally be registered with Arbetsförmedlingen, which is the Swedish unemployment service, and as well as the minimum contribution period. So you can think of this as an actual insurance. Before you can get your money, so to speak, you have to contribute to the fund for a certain period of time. So it's usually 12 months, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were some A-Kassas that decided to change the law. So my personal case, for example, is that over the course of 2020, for every month that I paid into the system, I was actually contributing, well, it counted as 4 months worth of contributions. So instead of paying for 12 months, I was able to get my qualification period within 3 months. So because 3 months, and then each of them is worth 4 contribution months. But as of the end of the pandemic, that might not be the case anymore. So don't by any means consider that to be the norm. Do count on the fact that you might need to pay for 12 months straight in order to be on the Acasa. And in terms of the requirements, you don't need to necessarily be employed in order to join an Acasa. You could also be newly arrived in Sweden, or as long as you have a person number, or as long as you have some sort of coordination number, you can join an Acasa, and I think you should, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that is Acasa, and it's the first component of where your unemployment money comes from. The second part is the income insurance, or inkomstförsäkring in Swedish. So this is more of an extra compensation rather than a main compensation, which is the case of the Acasa. So whatever you get on the Acasa, this is meant to supplement that. And so generally, it is about 80% of your previous salary for the first 100 days, and then there's a gradual scale down. So if I remember correctly, then it goes down to 70%, and then after that, gradually sinks lower. But this would not necessarily apply to everybody, because in order to qualify for a lot of the income insurance schemes, you need to make a certain amount of money a month before tax. So I was searching around the internet for the presentation, and the consensus, or the average figure, is around 33,000 Swedish crowns per month. That's how much you have to make before tax in order to qualify for income insurance. Otherwise, you only qualify for the Acasa, whatever the contribution there might be. I urge you, however, to check the specific requirements of the Acasa, because they might have a different income threshold. It might be 30,000, it might be 28, it might be higher. So please take this number as sort of an average and not as a definitive rule for every single of the Acasas. And again, to get the income insurance, you must be registered with an Acasa. So you can't just buy the income insurance and not the Acasa. So what I recommend from my personal experience is the moment you sign up for one of the Acasas, whether it be the academics Acasa or the steelworkers Acasa or the teachers, just choose as well the income insurance if you qualify for it. There is precedent for perhaps choosing Acasa in one and then maybe income insurance from another, but it's usually not best practice because you deal with a lot of paperwork, bureaucracy, and let's just be honest, a lot of the Swedish departments are not really good at talking to each other. So my personal suggestion, get both with one. Okay, so far we've talked about the Acasa and the inkomstförsäkring, the income insurance that goes on top of the Acasa if you make over a certain amount. But what if you're not in an Acasa? What is the very basic bare bones benefit? The Alfa Casa. So out of the three main compensation schemes, this is the only one that is actually owned and funded by the government. So it is funded by your taxes, essentially. The Acasa and the inkomstförsäkring, as I mentioned before, are tied to specific workers' unions. So it functions as a private entity, so to speak. But let's go back to Alfa Casa. So as I said, it's the government-run fund. So for those without an Acasa, although they do offer an Acasa as well, which is actually independent of any particular industry. So it's essentially an option for those of you that, if you don't find, for whatever reason, if you don't find that any of the Acasas meets your requirements, or you don't meet the requirements to join, then there's this. You can join this Acasa. However, be aware that the government contribution is a maximum of 510 Swedish crowns per day. And it's not even a guarantee that you'll get this money, because the way it works is, as I mentioned before, is they make an assessment based on how much money you've contributed into the system, as well as your salary. So you might actually be getting less than 510. So don't count with getting this exact amount. And in order to get the government-run fund, the Alfa Casa, you have to meet the basic requirements and at least one of the work life requirements. So let's go over what those are. Okay, so these are the basic requirements, and they're pretty straightforward. Be willing to work at least 17 hours per week. Be registered with Arbetsförmedlingen, which is again the public employment service, as a job seeker. And then this is where it gets a little bit legalese, so to speak. You have to be willing to work depending on the needs of the Swedish economy. So it's a principle called till arbetsmarknadsförfogande, which means if Arbetsförmedlingen tells you, hey, we need people in this particular industry, then you have to be very willing to do it or give a very good excuse to why you're not taking that particular job. So please bear this in mind when considering joining this ACASA or just not joining, but also in taking the government benefit. Okay, so you have to meet all of those basic requirements, and then the work-life requirements. Again, it's only one of them. So you have had to work at least 60 hours a month during the 6 of the last 12 calendar months, or you have worked at least 40 hours per month and a total of 420 hours under a continuous period of 6 months. It's a mouthful. Read it again. The PowerPoint will be shared. And this information is also found on the individual websites. But yes, you have to meet one of these requirements. All right, so now that we've covered the ACASAs, now that we've covered the basic government subsidy, the Alpha Casa, as well as the inkomstförsäkring, this is the part where I talk about choosing the right ACASA for you out of the 20 or so that are out there. So the first step is you choose your industry and be aware that you may actually qualify for more than one. So to give you a more personal example, I am part of the academics ACASA because I have a master's degree and I meet the requirements for that one. But I am also part of the Creative Professions Union. So I actually have a choice to make whether I want to get my ACASA with my union as well, or if I want to keep it separate. In my particular case, it just made more sense to get it with the academics at the time because I was unemployed looking for a job, but I wanted to still start contributing. So be aware, just make a choice about the industry that you want to join the ACASA for, and be aware that you might qualify for more than one. And now think of the size and the financial position of the ACASA. So for example, it might well be that you, let's say, work in IT and there might be an IT ACASA out there, but it's compared to maybe a more bigger one like the academics ACASA, it's much more smaller. So why is this important? So let's say that there is a period of economic uncertainty where a lot of people got unemployed at the same time. It might well be that in order to maintain their financial solvency, the smaller ACASA, the IT ACASA, this example, they might need to say, oh, we need to reduce the amount that you're going to get per day, the dog penning. Whereas a bigger ACASA, like the academics ACASA, I'm not making any marketing for them, by the way, just an example. They might be in a better financial position to sustain the amount of people going unemployed at the same time. And so it might well be that you don't lose money or you get a bigger contribution. So just make a decision make an assessment of the financial position of the ACASA. And this information is available online, but I would generally recommend to go for the bigger ones, the more established ones. As well as ensure that you meet the requirements to join the ACASA. So this, as I explained before, go on their website, see what sort of requirements you need to do. It could be, for example, that you work within a specific industry, that you are part of the union as well for that specific ACASA. You might even have to have certain certificates or degrees, specializations, but that information is very much independent on each of these. So go on their websites, it'll be given to you as a resource, and check them out. And then this is more of a tip. Check out for combo discounts. So what I mean by combo discounts is that, let's say you're looking for an ACASA, or let's say you're looking to join a union, which you should do both, by the way. We'll talk about that later. But it might well be that they say, okay, so if you're joining this ACASA, then you get a discount on the union, or if you join this union, then you get a discount on the ACA on joining our ACASA, as well as a free one-on-one consultation about your career. So be aware that these combo discounts do exist. They're not called combo discounts; these are just names that I use. But you might actually come out on top if you do your research and you take advantage of these discounts. For example, when I joined my union, I actually got very good discounts on Scandic hotels, for example, and I used those quite a lot while they lasted. But yeah, just be aware that these things do exist. So that was Acasa, that was Alfa Casa, and that was income insurance. And now we talk about unions, or facket, as it's called in Swedish. And this isn't necessarily money or a stream, a flow of money to your bank account, but it does impact how much you can get in compensation, so to speak. So I will try to explain. So one of the first things that you have to realize is that in many countries, there is a misconception about workers' unions. So maybe in your country, when you think union, you think, steel workers or more blue collar jobs, right? Or maybe they have a negative connotation where you're from. Like, for example, that's the case for my country, Puerto Rico, where when you say workers' union, there is a negative connotation to it. But what I want you to understand from this is that the concept of union here in Sweden is a completely different one from wherever you come from, or it could be quite similar. It just come with it with an open mind. And so joining a union, it's important if your job is not bound by a collective agreement, or kollektivavtal in Swedish. So the best way to check this is in whatever job contract you signed. If you see the words collective bargaining agreement or kollektivavtal, then you know that you are bound by it. But if it says specifically you're not in a kollektivavtal, then that means that you essentially are an independent worker that is less protected. Okay, so joining a union actually is great protection if you're not bound by a collective bargaining agreement. And now more specific. So joining a union also means that you have an open line of communication to somebody that can help you during your entire work life in Sweden. So to give you an example, let's just say that you're at your office, you're working, and then your manager or your boss or some coworker, they say something that's kind of weird, or they behave in a certain way that you're not really sure. To give you an example, maybe they made a joke about cuts, or maybe they made a joke about, oh, there's not so much Yule board or anything this year. So it makes you think like, something's wrong. So for those kinds of things, you can always contact your union representative and explain the situation to them. And they can say, oh, well, that probably was a normal thing to do or a normal thing to say. So it's a good way for you to sort of get outside of your head, if anything else, and make sure that whatever's happening in your office is something that should be happening. This is especially true for those of us that don't know the Swedish work market from the beginning, so keep that in mind. And now, more specifically, the union actually does negotiate on your behalf if the worst were to happen. So what I mean by this is, for example, you're going to get fired, or you are suffering harassment in some way, or you're being threatened. And so unfortunately, in a lot of these situations, it might well be that the company is trying to get rid of you, or they're trying to solve the problem as cheaply as possible, but the union will make sure to fight for you. In a very specific case, the union might actually true. So after a 6-month probation period here in Sweden, in order for you to get fired, normally what happens is that they have to talk to your union representative first, and then the union representative has to talk to the boss of your company to see if there's no other way to solve the problem other than firing. And so, for example, they might negotiate a generous compensation package in terms of money. They might also put conditions where if a job offer were to appear in the future, then you have first rights to that job offer before considering any other candidates. So essentially, the union always fights on your behalf when you need it the most. And what is? Oh yeah. And then, of course, as I was mentioning before, I'm not sure if you remember about the combo packs or the combo discounts. So if you join their Acasa, when you join the unions and their incomes for checking schemes, you probably will get a discount or you might get like a nice little bundle deal. So again, just keep that in mind. And I want to change the slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's talk about choosing your union. So it kind of works in a similar way to the Acasa system. So first you got to think, what is your industry? Are you an IT worker? Are you a teacher? Are you restaurant worker, right? And then check out what unions are there. So for example, there is Unionen, which is essentially a very generalized private sector union. So you can qualify for that if you work anywhere with the private sector. But then I actually belong to DIK, which is the Union of Creative Professions, which is more towards people that work in marketing, copywriting, culture work, museums, librarians, that sort of thing. Um, which brings me to my next question when you're choosing a union. What is most relevant for you, right? So if you want a union with strong negotiating power overall, that they can sort of force employers to do something, especially if it's big corporations, then joining a bigger union such as Unionen might be in your decision. But if you're looking for industry specific advice, so for example, information about how much of a salary you should ask for during an interview, or like what's the status of the industry as a whole, like what sort of reskilling opportunities are out there, then you might want to join a smaller yet more specific union for your specific niche. Those do exist, as well as do you need add-on services like maybe one-on-one job consulting over the phone, or if you are a freelancer or a business owner, maybe you want more specific advice, and or maybe you want discounts on joining specific organizations and stuff like that. So these are things that you have to take into consideration, what's relevant for you. And I would encourage you to go to the individual union websites and checking what's out there. And then finally, right, of course, the monthly fees. They're not expensive. Excuse me, I'm trying to remove my head here. There we go, because I have to see the final line. So choosing your union, the final step is what are the monthly fees. So it could be as cheap as 120 SEK, which is what I saw Unionen costed. But of course, the more services you hired or the smaller the union, then the higher it can be. So for example, for me, I'm paying around 260-ish crowns a month because it's perhaps a smaller union, as well as I have other services in there. So for example, I'm always interested in the statistics about what people my age should be asking for specific job titles here in Sweden. So that's something that I personally value. So hence why for me it's more justified to pay a little bit more money than the very bare essentials. Okay, so that was unions. We've covered quite a lot, and it's a lot to simmer over. It's a lot to think about. I know. I really do hope that I've done a good job at explaining it to you. But I want to leave you with some parting thoughts. So, what's the best time to join an Akasa and a union? Today. Preferably after you see this video. Because the faster you get into the system, the faster you start getting to that 12-month contribution period. And then the faster you can get your money if the worst were to happen. So the more you delay, the more time you waste. And then what happens? Well, you're practically uncovered. I mean, you get like the Alpha Casa government benefit, but that's not really, it will probably not cover your salary. So there's going to be a list attached to this presentation somehow, a resource with a list of ACASas and unions. Choose one, go through the information, and join one today. Then, don't think of joining these ACASas or unions as money spent each month. Think of it as an investment in peace of mind. So it's not just for when the worst happens. It's also like, let's say, for example, that you've been working in the same industry for 10 years and you're looking for a career change, right? So then this gives you that peace of mind in order to stop working for a period of time, quite generous period of time, actually, anywhere from 3 months to more, and see what's out there, see what other career opportunities there are, right? So think of it again as an investment in peace of mind. And it's not really that much money either, considering other things. I think maybe a dinner for two in Stockholm is way more expensive than what this costs each month. So think about that. And then also, yes, a lot of the information is in Swedish. Yes, the translations might be bad, and it might give you the expectation that these people don't speak English, but please speak English. And if they don't, please ask to be spoken to in English. Um, because well, there's no obligation for them to do so, but most people do speak English. And so for this could be, for example, if you need to get in touch with your union representative and then you get taken through some switchboard, right? It might be the case that, for example, you get for English press 3 or whatever. And if you see that you don't get through there, I would encourage you to stick with the phone or something. And then if you get somebody in Swedish, then just don't be afraid to speak to them in English, because more often than not, they will reply in English or be able to connect with someone that can. So just a little tip over there. Don't be afraid. Don't feel bad because you don't know that much Swedish yet. And as I mentioned before, come to me with questions. I'm always happy to help with this kind of stuff. I think the people at Reedy are going to link my LinkedIn profile somewhere. Maybe it's already in there. Feel free to send me a message with your questions, concerns. And I really do hope that this presentation has helped you understand how the Swedish unemployment system works, the importance of unions. And yeah, that's it for me. So thank you very much for your time and have a good day.